Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of InfoWars Nightly News. It's the day after Thanksgiving, November 25th, 2011, on this Friday edition. And we're going to premiere here, for the first time, on InfoWars Nightly News, an in-depth interview, at least part of the interview, that my team conducted with Dr. Pegge Begich in Alaska. Now, Dr. Begich is an amazing individual, and of course his father was Congressman Begich. His brother is a U.S. Senator. He has researched so many patents and government secret programs, and much of what we know about the globalist super science program, stuff that would be thought of science fiction just a few decades ago, comes from Dr. Pegge Begich. And so we're going to premiere here part of a lengthy interview that our crew did that was intended for an upcoming film, but because of everything happening in the world, we're just going ahead and releasing our chemtrail research that's groundbreaking, our HAARP research, our mind control research, everything. We're just putting it out there, and I hope it's not pearls before swine. I hope that you get this information and get it out to everybody you know. If you go to prisonplanet.tv, you'll notice in the special reports, there's new stuff there almost every day now, and we've got a whole team working around the clock to bring you this information. And it's because you do value this information that we're able to operate. It's your support of Infowars.com, the buying of the books and videos, your memberships here at prisonplanet.tv that make it all possible. But the information that Dr. Begich covers is so groundbreaking, and so we're going to premiere this here for you. And if you want to watch it at your leisure or download it, it's also posted in the special reports section of prisonplanet.tv. So I give you Dr. Pegge Begich and his breakdown of some of the secret sciences that are being used against the population of the planet today, including high-tech electronic mind control that in his research dwarfs chemical mind control. So here is the Infowars.com interview with Dr. Pegge Begich.
The system that we're talking about is going to be the HAARP system, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, operating up here in Alaska. And if you also think about, and most people remember this from even high school science, but the magnetic field lines that come from the South Pole stretching around and then intersecting at the North Pole and surrounding the planet. These magnetic field lines are very much similar to what you would see on a bar magnet illustration in your basic science books, or in a motor. If you think about the Earth spinning and actually creating a dynamo, a motor, and these magnetic field lines being one of the outproducts of that, in conjunction with interaction with the solar wind, you get things like the magnetosphere and the magnetotail, which comes back behind sort of the way the downwind of the planet, if you will, from the sun itself. In any case, this dynamic of the Earth's motion, solar radiation, the interplay of all of the various factors of the planet are looked at in separate, independent, individual science, not really looked at in integrated science. How do all those systems work together, and what do they create in outcomes? But as we look at HAARP, the primary idea is to affect this ionosphere and then affect these magnetic field lines. And ideally, you want to affect those magnetic field lines at the closest place to which they intersect the planet, which happens to be at the poles. And in the case of where Alaska sits on a map, very near the poles, the furthest northern territory in the United States, where you could locate a facility on U.S. territory that you could inject energy directly into the magnetic field lines of the Earth. We're going to be talking about an area above the Earth's surface, about 30 miles above the Earth's surface, moving out several hundred miles beyond that, the ionosphere. It's a highly charged area. It filters out cosmic radiation, various particle streams that without it would make life impossible on the planet. Now, one of the ideas behind HAARP, which is an array or field of antenna here in Alaska, 180 antenna in the array today, it fires or concentrates, focuses radio frequency energy that it literally sends up into a relatively narrow beam affecting the magnetic field lines in one instance where the energy is normally, naturally flowing from the South Pole, coming up, arcing high above the equator, and then coming back into the North Pole with the energy flowing from south to north. What happens is those magnetic field lines act as waveguides, so you can pump energy out of HAARP, focus it on those magnetic field lines, and then it screws itself, if you were to be able to see it, with like a corkscrewing motion where the energy is actually moving now from north to south using the magnetic field lines as a waveguide. Now what would that do essentially? If you had, for instance, an intercontinental ballistic missile that gets fired from China to the U.S. and it traverses those magnetic field lines with those charged particles racing along them, using them as waveguides, it would create a virtual shield around the planet, so any of those incoming objects, intercontinental ballistic missiles, any satellites that happen to traverse those areas, or any other electronically sensitive equipment would be destroyed almost instantly. And so when you think about HAARP, there's a couple of ways to look at it. One is manipulation of those field lines, those magnetic field lines, which actually have been mapped. And if you look at some of the ways those are mapped is barium particles are injected into the upper atmosphere and lower ionosphere using barium-laden rockets. What those create when you inject radio frequency energy is air glow, where you get this sort of light-up effect. So you can actually see this corkscrewing motion around those magnetic field lines and serving as waveguides. In fact, they did that test a number of years ago in Alaska. And they do these from time to time, just more or less illustrate what they think theoretically should happen is actually happening in place and at the time of the experiments. Now, HAARP as an array of antenna can be focused and concentrated. You've got to think about this in a much different way than normally how radio frequency energy behaves. If you think about a radio broadcast antenna, broadcasting radio frequency energy, that energy dissipates or spreads out very rapidly from the point of broadcast, the antenna, out into the atmosphere. And the further away you get, the less dense, the less concentrated is that radio frequency energy, which is why radio stations eventually fade out over distance. On the other hand, what HAARP does is by firing this array or field of antennas, you imagine firing them in such a way as to create kind of a corkscrewing motion, a cyclotron resonance is what it's called, where that energy is then focused to a smaller and smaller area, and as it hits the ionosphere, it becomes concentrated. And think about that in the same way as light coming off of a laser versus light coming off of a flashlight. When you think about HAARP, think about it as a mechanism on the ground that's designed to interact directly or to plug into those magnetic field lines and actually then use the environment itself as part of the machine on the ground. And think about it in this sense. Think about that machine on the ground, this field of antenna broadcasting radio frequency as a primer, the small amount of energy, because the big energy is contained in the natural environment. The idea is if we understand enough about how these mechanisms work, then we can trigger various cascading effects where it sort of builds on the energy that's naturally in place. And so when you think about HAARP, not just in the effect of magnetic field lines, but another opportunity to manipulate energetic systems within the Earth has to do with the ionosphere itself. And imagine that ionosphere is a bubble around the Earth, several hundred miles thick, again starting about 30 miles off the Earth's surface. Now, that's a highly charged area, a tremendous amount of energy potential there. In fact, some will remember a number of years ago there was a shuttle experiment where they drug a tether, a dangling wire through the ionosphere to see what would happen. And energy was picked up as it moved, because when you move something, a conductor through an electric field that's as charged as the ionosphere, it actually begins to move current, which it did. It shunted that current straight into the shuttle and almost blew it out of the sky. Now, the thing that came out of that didn't get widely talked about was the amount of energy produced could be useful, for instance, for keeping a low orbiting space platform in orbit around the planet, being able to charge it up by just tapping the energy by the fact that it's orbiting the planet and moving through the ionosphere would be one way to charge up these kinds of space-based platforms, whether they were for weapon systems or running low-orbiting satellites. But basically moving energy into space in normal, like shuttle payloads, is prohibitively expensive, very difficult to pull off to any great degree. But if you could create an energy source sufficient to run these kinds of systems, then you eliminate all kinds of logistical problems, and you're able to keep these things aloft for great deals of time. Part of the HAARP idea was if you could focus radio frequency energy, you could even concentrate it and send energy directly to these same kind of low-orbiting space platforms, as an example. One of the other thoughts with HAARP systems are the actual heating of the ionosphere. And when it's heated, because this energy is concentrated, what happens is the ionosphere then lifts up, moves out several hundred kilometers. Now imagine if you're a satellite drifting through space where there's no atmosphere, and all of a sudden you hit a column of atmosphere. What will happen is it creates friction, and that friction causes that satellite to burn up, and all of a sudden you got a satellite down. When you turn the instrument off, everything goes back to normal, and you have plausible deniability on a satellite going down because nobody knows this kind of technology generally exists. Now the other place you can use it in that same application, imagine that column going out several hundred miles into space from its normal atmospheric level way down here. Now you've got an incoming comet or asteroid coming in from outer space at a tremendous velocity. Now normally those objects, when they hit our atmosphere, they again encounter tremendous friction, they burn up, and most objects dissipate before they ever hit the surface. But big objects, the kinds of objects people are worried about, if you could, say, go from 30 miles of atmosphere to 200 miles of atmosphere, almost 7 times as much distance, and project a trajectory downward, what you're able to do in that instance is literally allow those larger objects to burn up way before they hit the Earth. In fact, the Strategic Studies Institute in London, in reviewing Soviet research on this very same technology, was suggesting that it could be used for not an anti-satellite technology so much as an anti-asteroid or comet-based technology. But all of those things also create a side effect. When you move that much atmosphere up into space, and it's about 30 miles diameter, these columns. So imagine 30 miles in diameter and a couple hundred miles up. Well, below that are pressure systems, high pressure, low pressure systems, and jet streams, all of which can be altered by the manipulation of the ionosphere in this way. And that then creates downstream weather effects that cannot be modeled, that cannot accurately be predicted, and therein lies huge problems. When you start to manipulate by technology applications to create one effect, you might inadvertently create a number of other effects, as is the case with HAARP. Looking at sort of where are these facilities? You know, here in Alaska, we have one at Gokana, which is about 250 miles northeast of Anchorage. Then going across Canada, there's a number of these facilities that are controlled by the Canadian government. Rosalie Bertel has reported on those. Then there is one that sits right up here in northern Norway, and this is run by the Max Planck Institute. And then there are 5 old transmitters in the former Soviet Union. Literally, when you look, they go around the globe. These can be used in conjunction with each other, triangulating to hit the same point, creating unique and different resonance effects and creating even more power. Flipping the planet upside down, in Antarctica, China put in a facility a couple years ago to begin working in this technology. And then Arecibo, Puerto Rico, in the southeastern, off the coast in the southeastern United States, also has a facility that's been retrofitted to essentially do the same thing as HAARP.